I hope you enjoy this story. Let's begin. I leaned against the chain-link fence, squinting in the bright Ohio sun. Jake was up to bat, his stance a mirror of what we'd practiced in the backyard. The kid had natural talent, no doubt about it. I felt a swell of pride as he connected with a solid crack, sending the ball sailing over second base. Run, Jake, run. Lorraine's voice rang out from the bleachers. I glanced over, catching her eye. She flashed me that megawatt smile that still got me after all these years. Jake slid into second just as the ball reached the baseman's glove. Safe. The crowd erupted, and I couldn't help but grin. My boy was on fire today. Nice hit, Jake, I called out. He beamed back at me, giving a thumbs up. The game wrapped up with a win for our team. I high-fived the kids as they filed past, ruffling Jake's hair as he bounced by. Great game, coach, Lorraine said, wrapping an arm around my waist. We should celebrate. How about a barbecue at our place? I nodded, pulling her close. Sounds perfect. I'll text Max, see if he wants to swing by. As we headed to the parking lot, Jake chattering excitedly about his hits, I couldn't help but feel like the luckiest son of a bitch in Dayton. Beautiful wife, great kids, coaching Little League on the weekends. It was the American dream, served up with a side of apple pie. Little did I know, that dream was about to turn into a goddamn nightmare. The barbecue was in full swing by late afternoon. I manned the grill, flipping burgers and keeping an eye on the beers. Max had shown up with a six-pack and was entertaining Lily with his terrible magic tricks. The backyard was filled with the sounds of laughter and clinking glasses. I glanced over at Lorraine, chatting with our neighbor Sarah. That's when I noticed him. Dr. Gregory Pearson, the new hotshot pediatric surgeon from the hospital. He'd moved to Dayton a few months back, and Lorraine had mentioned working with him a few times. Something about the way he was looking at my wife set my teeth on edge. I watched as he said something, and Lorraine threw her head back, laughing. It wasn't her usual laugh, though. This one sounded different. Forced. Maybe. A little too eager. I shook my head, trying to brush it off. Lorraine was just being friendly, that's all. No need to get worked up over nothing. Earth to Evan, Max's voice cut through my thoughts. You trying to cremate those burgers? I looked down, cursing as I flipped the slightly charred patties. Just lost in thought, I guess. Max raised an eyebrow, following my gaze to where Lorraine and Dr. Pearson were still chatting. Everything okay, man? I nodded, maybe a bit too quickly. Yeah, of course. Why wouldn't it be? Max shrugged, taking a swig of his beer. No reason. Just checking. The rest of the barbecue passed without incident, but I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling in my gut. Something was off, and I couldn't quite put my finger on what. Later that night, I tucked Jake and Lily into bed. Jake was still riding high from his baseball victory, while Lily clutched her favorite stuffed unicorn, eyelids drooping. Dad, Jake said as I turned off the light, do you think I could play for the Reds someday? I chuckled, ruffling his hair. If you keep playing like you did today, kiddo, anything's possible. As I closed their door, I heard Lorraine's voice, hushed and urgent, coming from our bedroom. I frowned, padding quietly down the hall. I can't talk now. I'll call you back later. She was whispering into her phone, back turned to the door. I leaned against the doorframe, crossing my arms. Everything okay, babe? Lorraine jumped, spinning around. Her face was flushed, eyes wide. Jesus, Evan, you scared me. I raised an eyebrow, keeping my tone light. Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt your top-secret phone call. She laughed, but it sounded hollow. Oh, it's just work stuff. You know how it is. I nodded slowly, not buying it for a second. Right. Work stuff. Lorraine set her phone on the nightstand, walking over to wrap her arms around my neck. How about we get ready for bed? It's been a long day. I let her change the subject, but the seed of doubt had been planted. Something wasn't adding up, and I was damn well going to figure out what. We climbed into bed, Lorraine immediately turning away from me. I stared at the ceiling, mind racing. When I reached out to touch her shoulder, she stiffened. Not tonight, Evan, she murmured. I'm exhausted from my shift. I pulled my hand back, jaw clenching. This wasn't the first time she brushed me off lately. Hell, I couldn't remember the last time we'd been intimate. Always an excuse, too tired, headache, stress from work. As Lorraine's breathing evened out into sleep, I lay there, wide awake. The nagging feeling from earlier had grown into a full-blown suspicion. I glanced over at her phone on the nightstand, its presence almost taunting me. Before I could talk myself out of it, I reached over and grabbed it. The screen was locked, but I knew a trick or two from my days working IT before I opened the shop. It took a few minutes, but I managed to bypass the lock screen. My heart pounded as I scrolled through her messages. Nothing out of the ordinary at first. Work stuff, group chats with her friends. But then I noticed something odd. Several conversations had been deleted recently. I dug deeper, using a recovery app I'd installed ages ago. And there it was, like a punch to the gut. A single recovered message. Last night was incredible. Same time next week? Gee. I stared at the screen, while rising in my throat. There was only one G I could think of. Gregory fucking Pearson. I set the phone back on the nightstand, hands shaking. Part of me wanted to wake Lorraine up right then and there, demand answers. But the cold, calculating part of my brain, the part that had gotten me through some tough times, told me to wait, to gather more evidence. One thing was for damn sure. Lorraine was going to rue the day she decided to fuck with Evan Callahan. The next morning, I headed to work at Callahan's Auto Repair. My mind a storm of anger and betrayal. The familiar smell of oil and grease did little to calm my nerves as I walked into the shop. Max was already there, head buried under the hood of a beat-up Chevy. He glanced up as I walked in, wiping his hands on a rag. "Morning, sunshine," he called out. His grin faded as he got a good look at my face. "Jesus, Evan, you look like hell warmed over." I grabbed a wrench, gripping it so tight my knuckles turned white. "We need to talk." Max nodded, following me to the back office. I shut the door behind us, leaning against it with a heavy sigh. "All right, spill it," Max said, perching on the edge of my desk. "What's eating you?" The words bitter on my tongue. "I think Lorraine's cheating on me." Max's eyebrows shot up. "Shit, you sure about that?" I told him everything. The odd behavior at the barbecue, the secretive phone call, the deleted messages. As I spoke, Max's expression hardened. "Hate to say it, man, but it sounds like she's stepping out on you," he said, shaking his head. "Classic signs. The distance, the secrecy, the whole 9 yards." I slammed my fist against the door, the pain barely registering through my anger. I want to confront her, but you need solid proof, Max finished for me. He leaned forward, eyes serious. "Listen to me, Evan. You can't go off half-cocked on this. If you jump the gun without evidence, she'll just cover her tracks. You need to be smart about this." I nodded, knowing he was right. Max had been through a nasty divorce a few years back, caught his ex with her personal trainer. He knew the score. "So what do I do?" I asked, feeling lost for the first time in years. Max stood up, clapping a hand on my shoulder. "You watch, you wait, and you gather every scrap of evidence you can get your hands on. Then, when you've got her dead to rights, you drop the hammer." His words ignited something in me, a cold, calculated fury. Lorraine thought she could play me for a fool? She had another thing coming. "Thanks, Max," I said, straightening up. "I owe you one." He shook his head. "Nah, man. This one's on the house. Just promise me you'll nail that cheating bitch to the wall when the time comes." I grinned, but there was no humor in it. "Oh, you can count on that." The rest of the day passed in a blur of oil changes and tire rotations. By the time I got home, I was wound tighter than a spring. Lorraine was in the kitchen, stirring something on the stove. She smiled as I walked in, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Hey, honey," she said, leaning in for a quick peck on the cheek. "How was work?" I shrugged, grabbing a beer from the fridge. Same old, same old." "You?" She turned back to the stove, her shoulders tense. "Oh, you know. Busy day at the hospital." I watched her as we ate dinner, noting how she kept checking her phone. Jake and Lily chattered about their day at school, oblivious to the tension crackling between their parents. After the kids were in bed, Lorraine announced she had a late shift at the hospital. My jaw clenched as I remembered all the other late shifts she'd had recently. "Again?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. Seems like you're working a lot of nights lately. She shrugged, not meeting my eyes. We're short-staffed. You know how it is. As soon as she was out the door, I sprang into action. I told Jake and Lily I had to run back to the shop for a bit, then hopped in my truck and followed Lorraine's car. My heart pounded as I tailed her through the streets of Dayton. She wasn't heading towards the hospital. Instead, she pulled into the parking lot of a hotel just outside the city limits. I parked across the street, watching as she got out of her car. A few minutes later, another car pulled up. My blood ran cold as I recognized Dr. Gregory Pearson stepping out. They embraced, right there in the parking lot, before heading into the hotel together. I gripped the steering wheel so hard I thought it might snap. Part of me wanted to storm in there, catch them in the act. But Max's words echoed in my head. I needed more than just my word against theirs. I needed hard evidence. As I drove home, my mind raced. This wasn't just about catching Lorraine in the act anymore. No, this was war. And I was going to make damn sure I came out on top. I knew what I had to do next, even though the thought made my stomach churn. It was time to call in the big guns. It was time to reach out to my estranged brother, Derek. Derek and I hadn't spoken in years, not since our old man's funeral. Bad blood ran deep in the Callahan family. But if there was one thing Derek was good at, it was digging up dirt. His time as a Marine had led him into private investigation work, and word on the street was he was the best in the business. I waited until the next day, after the kids were at school and Lorraine was at work. Sitting in my truck outside the shop, I dialed the number I'd sworn I'd never use again. It rang 3 times before a gruff voice answered. Callahan Investigations. I swallowed hard. Derek? It's Evan. There was a long pause. Well, I'll be damned. Little brother finally remembered my number. Huh? What's the occasion? Someone die? I gritted my teeth, pushing down the urge to hang up. I need your help, Derek. It's about Lorraine. Something in my voice must have tipped him off. When Derek spoke again, his tone was all business. What's going on, Evan? I spilled it all. The suspicious behavior, the hotel rendezvous, everything. Derek listened without interrupting, and I could almost hear the gears turning in his head. All right, he said finally. I'll look into it. But Evan, you sure you want to go down this road? Once you know for sure, there's no going back. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Trust me, Derek. I'm way past the point of no return. For the next week, I lived in a state of constant tension. Derek kept me updated on his findings, sending me photos and recordings that made my blood boil. Lorraine and Dr. Pearson, caught in intimate moments. Hotel receipts. Incriminating text messages. Each piece of evidence was another nail in the coffin of my marriage. Finally, Derek called me to meet him at a dingy diner on the outskirts of town. I slid into the booth across from him, noting how the years hadn't been kind to my older brother. His face was lined, his hair graying at the temples. Here, he said without preamble, sliding a thick envelope across the table. Everything I found. Photos, recordings, the works. It's all there, Evan. Lorraine's been carrying on with this Pearson guy for months. I stared at the envelope, not quite able to bring myself to open it. Thanks, Derek. I owe you one. He shook his head, his expression grim. No, you don't. This one's on the house. Family's family, even when we're at each other's throats. I nodded, grateful for his unexpected show of solidarity. But Derek wasn't done. There's something else, Evan, he said, leaning in close. This Pearson guy? He's into some shady shit. I did some digging, and it looks like he's tied to an illegal prescription drug ring operating out of the hospital. My head snapped up. What? Derek nodded. Yeah, I'm talking serious stuff here. Opioids, mainly. Can't say for sure if Lorraine's involved, but he trailed off, letting the implication hang in the air. I felt like I'd been sucker punched. This wasn't just about infidelity anymore. Lorraine had potentially gotten herself mixed up in something far more dangerous. Jesus Christ, I muttered, running a hand over my face. What the hell am I supposed to do with this? Derek shrugged. That's up to you, little brother. But whatever you decide, be careful. These aren't the kind of people you want to mess with lightly. I left the diner in a daze, the envelope burning a hole in my jacket pocket. My mind was a whirlwind of anger, betrayal, and now, fear. Not for myself, but for Jake and Lily. What kind of danger had Lorraine brought to our doorstep? As if on cue, my phone rang. It was the school. Jake had gotten into a fight with another student. Apparently, the kid had called Lorraine a cheater. My blood ran cold. How the hell did Jake know? Had he overheard something? Seen something? I raced to the school, my mind racing. This wasn't just about me and Lorraine anymore. Our kids were getting caught in the crossfire. I had to do something, and fast. As I pulled into the school parking lot, I made a decision. Tonight, I was going to confront Lorraine. Come hell or high water, this ended now. The truth was going to come out, and God help anyone who tried to stand in my way. I stood in the shadows of our bedroom, watching Lorraine sleep. The soft glow of the streetlight filtered through the curtains, casting an eerie light on her face. She looked peaceful, untroubled. It made my blood boil. How dare she sleep so soundly while our entire life was crumbling around us? I gripped the envelope Derek had given me, the damning evidence of her betrayal. It was time to end this charade. Lorraine, I said, my voice cutting through the silence like a knife. Wake up. We need to talk. She stirred, blinking up at me in confusion. Evan? What's wrong? What time is it? Time for the truth, I growled, flicking on the bedside lamp. The sudden light made her flinch. Lorraine sat up, pulling the covers around her. What are you talking about? Evan, you're scaring me. I laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. I'm scaring you? That's rich, Lorraine. Real fucking rich. I tossed the envelope onto the bed. Photos spilled out, Lorraine and Dr. Pearson locked in an embrace, entering hotel rooms, sharing intimate dinners. Her face drained of color as she stared at the evidence of her infidelity. Evan, I can explain, she stammered, her hands shaking as she picked up one of the photos. Save it, I spat. I've heard enough of your lies. How long, Lorraine? How long have you been fucking him? Tears welled up in her eyes. Good. I wanted her to cry. I wanted her to feel a fraction of the pain she'd caused me. It, it just happened, she whispered. I didn't mean for it to. Bullshit. I cut her off. Things like this don't just happen. You made a choice, Lorraine. You chose to throw away our marriage, our family. For what? A quick fuck with some hotshot doctor? She flinched at my words, tears now flowing freely. It wasn't like that, Evan. I was feeling lost, unappreciated. Greg. He made me feel alive again. And I didn't? I demanded, my voice rising. 15 years of marriage, 2 kids, and I didn't make you feel alive enough? Lorraine buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with sobs. I'm sorry, Evan. I'm so sorry. It was a mistake. I never meant to hurt you or the kids. I scoffed. A mistake? A mistake is forgetting to pick up milk at the store. This, I gestured to the photos scattered on the bed. This is a deliberate betrayal. And don't you dare bring the kids into this. You didn't give a damn about them when you were sneaking around behind my back? She looked up at me, her eyes pleading. Please, Evan. We can work through this. I'll end it with Greg, I swear. We can go to counseling. Fix our marriage? Fix our marriage? I laughed, the sound devoid of any humor. There's nothing left to fix, Lorraine. You broke it. You broke us. I turned away from her, unable to look at her tear-stained face any longer. Part of me wanted to comfort her, to hold her like I had for the past 15 years. But that part was overshadowed by the rage and betrayal coursing through my veins. There's more, I said, my back still turned to her. Your boyfriend isn't just a cheating scumbag. He's involved in something bigger. A drug ring at the hospital. I heard her sharp intake of breath. What? No, that's impossible. Greg would never. I spun around, fixing her with a hard stare. Are you really going to sit there and defend him? After everything? Lorraine shook her head, her eyes wide with disbelief. I swear, Evan, I didn't know anything about that. You have to believe me. I don't have to believe a goddamn thing you say, I growled. You've lost that, right? I walked to the closet, pulling out a duffel bag. I tossed it onto the bed next to her. Pack your shit. I want you out of this house. Evan, please, she begged, reaching for my hand. I jerked away from her touch. Where am I supposed to go? I don't give a fuck, I said coldly. Go to your boyfriend's place. Or a hotel. Just get out of my sight. Lorraine's sobs grew louder as she stumbled out of bed, haphazardly shoving clothes into the bag. I watched her, my jaw clenched, refusing to let her tears sway me. Suddenly, the bedroom door creaked open. Jake stood there, his eyes wide with fear. Dad? Mom? What's going on? Lorraine froze, clutching a shirt to her chest. I cursed under my breath. This wasn't how I wanted the kids to find out. Jake, buddy, go back to bed, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. Your mom and I are just having a discussion. Why is mom crying? Jake demanded, his young face set in a stubborn frown. Are you fighting? Lorraine let out a choked sob, sinking to the floor, at a loss for words. Jake, I started, but he cut me off. Is this because mom's a cheater? He blurted out. The room fell silent. Lorraine's head snapped up, her eyes wide with shock. I stared at my son, a cold dread settling in my stomach. What did you say? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Jake's lower lip trembled. I heard Tommy at school. He said his dad told him that mom was cheating on you with Dr. Pearson. I got in a fight with him because he was lying. He was lying, right? I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath. When I opened them, I fixed Lorraine with a hard stare. You want to field this one, or should I? Lorraine struggled to her feet, reaching out for Jake. Baby, it's complicated. Mommy made a mistake. Don't, I snapped. Don't you dare try to sugarcoat this. I knelt down in front of Jake, placing my hands on his shoulders. Jake, listen to me. Your mother, she did something very wrong. She hurt our family. But that's not your fault, okay? None of this is your fault. Jake's eyes filled with tears. But why? Doesn't she love us anymore? The question hit me like a punch to the gut. I pulled Jake into a tight hug, glaring at Lorraine over his shoulder. She stood there, tears streaming down her face, looking utterly lost. Of course she loves you, I said, even though the words tasted like ash in my mouth. But sometimes adults make bad choices, and those choices have consequences. Jake pulled back, wiping his nose on his sleeve. Is mom leaving? I nodded, my throat tight. For now, yes. She needs to go away for a while. No, Jake cried, turning to Lorraine. Mom, please don't go. I'm sorry I got in a fight at school. I'll be good, I promise. Lorraine took a step forward, her arms outstretched. Oh, Jake, baby, it's not your fault. Mommy just needs some time. Don't, I said, my voice low. Don't you dare make him think this is his fault. I stood up, keeping a protective arm around Jake. You need to leave. Now. Lorraine's face crumpled, but she nodded. She grabbed the half-packed bag and stumbled towards the door. As she passed Jake, she reached out to touch his cheek, but he shrank back against me. I'm sorry, she whispered, her voice breaking. I'm so sorry. And then she was gone, her footsteps echoing down the stairs. I heard the front door open and close, and then silence. Jake looked up at me, his eyes swimming with tears. Dad? What happens now? I pulled him close, resting my chin on top of his head. Now, we stick together. You, me, and Lily. We're going to be okay, buddy. I promise. As I held my son, listening to his muffled sobs, I knew one thing for certain. Lorraine may have broken our family, but I'd be damned if I let her destroy it completely. Whatever came next, I'd face it head on. For Jake. For Lily. For the family we still had left. The next morning, I sat in Victoria Reeves' office, my head pounding from a sleepless night. The divorce lawyer looked at me over her thick-rimmed glasses, her expression a mix of sympathy and calculation. Mr. Callahan, she said, her voice crisp and businesslike, I understand you want to file for divorce on the grounds of adultery. However, I must inform you that Ohio is a no-fault divorce state. This means that regardless of your wife's infidelity, the court won't take that into consideration when dividing assets or determining custody. I leaned forward, my hands clenched into fists. You're telling me that after what she did, she could still walk away with half of everything? That she could get custody of my kids? Victoria nodded, her expression grim. I'm afraid so. In the eyes of the law, her affair doesn't impact her ability to be a parent. And as for assets, unless you have a prenuptial agreement, everything acquired during the marriage is considered marital property. I slumped back in my chair, feeling like I'd been sucker punched. This is bullshit. She cheats, she lies, and she gets rewarded for it? I understand your frustration, Mr. Callahan, Victoria said, her tone softening slightly. But we need to approach this strategically. You mentioned there might be criminal activity involved? I nodded, thinking of the drug ring Derek had uncovered. Yeah, her boyfriend's mixed up in some illegal prescription drug operation at the hospital. I don't know if Lorraine's involved or not. Victoria's eyebrows shot up. Now that could change things. If we can prove your wife was involved in criminal activity, it could significantly impact custody arrangements. Do you have any concrete evidence? I shook my head. Not yet. My brother's working on it, but nothing solid so far. I see, Victoria said, tapping her pen against her desk. Mr. Callahan, I'm going to be blunt with you. Without that evidence, we're fighting an uphill battle. Your wife could potentially claim half of your assets and push for joint custody, if not primary custody of your children. The thought of Lorraine taking my kids, taking half of everything I'd worked for, made my blood boil. So what do we do? Victoria leaned forward, her eyes sharp. We gather every scrap of evidence we can. Financial records, phone records, anything that might suggest your wife's involvement in this drug operation. And in the meantime, we need to start building a case for why you should have primary custody of your children. I nodded, a determined set to my jaw. Whatever it takes. I'm not letting her take my kids. As I left Victoria's office, my mind was racing. I needed more evidence, more ammunition to use against Lorraine. And I knew just who to talk to. I found Max at the auto shop, elbow deep in the engine of a beat-up Chevy. He looked up as I approached, wiping his hands on a greasy rag. Hey, man, he said, his eyes searching my face. How'd it go with the lawyer? I leaned against the workbench, crossing my arms. Not great. Turns out Ohio's got some bullshit no-fault divorce laws. Lorraine could still walk away with half of everything, maybe even the kids. Max's eyes widened. You're shitting me. After what she did. I nodded. Yeah, unless we can prove she was involved in something illegal. Max was quiet for a moment, then he looked at me, a dangerous glint in his eye. You know, there might be a way to make sure she doesn't get shit. I raised an eyebrow. I'm listening. We could leak the affair, Max said, his voice low. I've got connections at the local news station. We could blow this thing wide open, drag her name through the mud. By the time we're done, she'd be lucky if anyone in this town would even look at her, let alone give her a job or custody of the kids. For a moment, the idea was tempting. The thought of Lorraine's reputation in tatters, of her feeling even a fraction of the pain and humiliation she'd caused me. But then I thought of Jake and Lily. How would they feel, seeing their mother's shame splashed across the local news? I shook my head. We can't, Max. It'd hurt the kids too much. Max looked like he wanted to argue, but he just nodded. You're right. I just hate seeing her get away with this, you know? She won't, I said, my voice hard. One way or another, I'm going to make sure she pays for what she did to our family. As I left the shop, I realized I needed a new perspective. Someone who could see the bigger picture, who might have insights I was missing. That's when I thought of Sarah Blackwood. Sarah had moved in next door about a year ago. A retired detective with sharp eyes and an even sharper mind. We'd exchanged pleasantries over the fence, but I'd never really gotten to know her. Now, I found myself knocking on her door, hoping she might be able to help. Sarah answered, her silver hair pulled back in a neat bun. She took one look at my face and ushered me inside without a word. Sit, she said, gesturing to a worn leather armchair. I'll make some coffee. Something tells me you could use it. As the rich aroma of coffee filled the air, I found myself spilling everything to Sarah. The affair, the drug ring, the impossible situation with the divorce. She listened without interrupting, her keen eyes taking in every detail. When I finished, Sarah leaned back in her chair, a thoughtful expression on her face. You're in a tough spot, Evan, but I think I might be able to help. I sat up straighter. How? You need more evidence, especially about this drug ring, Sarah said. And I happen to have some equipment that might come in handy. Surveillance gear, left over from my detective days. We could set it up in your house, your car. Might catch something useful. I felt a glimmer of hope for the first time in days. You do that? Sarah nodded, a determined set to her jaw. Damn right I would. What Lorraine did, it's not just about the affair. If she's involved in this drug operation, even peripherally, she's putting your kids at risk. That's not something I can sit by and ignore. We spent the next few hours setting up the surveillance equipment. Tiny cameras in the living room and kitchen, a voice-activated recorder in Lorraine's car. It felt invasive, but I pushed down the guilt. This was about protecting my family. As Sarah and I finished up, she put a hand on my arm. Evan, there's someone else you might want to talk to. Christina Pearson. I frowned. Dr. Pearson's wife? Why? Think about it, Sarah said. She's a pharmaceutical rep, right? If her husband's involved in a drug ring, chances are he's been manipulating her company's supplies. She might have information we could use. The idea of facing the wife of the man who destroyed my marriage made my stomach churn. But Sarah was right. We needed all the help we could get. The next day, I found myself sitting across from Christina Pearson in a quiet coffee shop on the outskirts of town. She was a petite woman with carefully styled blonde hair and manicured nails. The perfect doctor's wife. Mr. Callahan, she said, her voice tight with barely contained emotion. I have to admit, I was surprised to get your call. What could we possibly have to talk about? I took a deep breath. Mrs. Pearson, Christina, I'm sorry to have to tell you this, but our spouses have been having an affair. Christina's face went pale, her perfectly manicured hands clenching around her coffee cup. What? No, that's impossible. Greg would never. I pulled out one of the photos Derek had taken, sliding it across the table. Christina's eyes widened as she took in the image of her husband and my wife locked in an embrace. I'm sorry, I said, and I meant it. No one deserved this kind of betrayal. But there's more. I have reason to believe that Dr. Pearson might be involved in something illegal. A prescription drug ring operating out of the hospital. Christina's head snapped up, her shock giving way to anger. What are you talking about? Greg is a respected surgeon. He would never. I held up a hand, cutting her off. I know this is hard to hear, but please, just listen. Have you noticed anything odd lately? Any discrepancies in your company's inventory? Supplies that don't add up? Christina opened her mouth to argue, then closed it again. A flicker of doubt crossed her face. There have been some inconsistencies. I thought it was just a clerical error, but now you're not so sure, I finished for her. She nodded slowly, her eyes filling with tears. Oh God, what has Greg done? I leaned forward, my voice low and urgent. Christina, I need your help. If you have any information, anything at all that could shed light on this operation, it could make a huge difference. Not just for me and my kids, but for you too. Christina wiped her eyes, her jaw set in determination. What do you need to know? As she began to talk, detailing discrepancies in drug orders and suspicious conversations she'd overheard, I felt a surge of satisfaction. We were finally getting somewhere. Back at home, the weight of everything threatened to crush me. Jake had become increasingly sullen, lashing out at the slightest provocation. Lily, too young to fully understand what was happening, clung to me like a lifeline, sensing the tension in the air. I found Jake in his room, angrily pounding away at his video game controller. I sat on the edge of his bed, watching him for a moment. Hey, buddy, I said softly. Can we talk? Jake shrugged, not taking his eyes off the screen. Whatever. I sighed. I know things have been tough lately. With your mom gone, and all the changes. Is she ever coming back? Jake interrupted, his voice small and vulnerable. The question hit me like a punch to the gut. I wanted to lie, to tell him everything would go back to normal. But I couldn't. I wouldn't become a liar like Lorraine. I don't know, buddy, I said honestly. But what I do know is that no matter what happens, you and Lily are my top priority. We're going to get through this together, okay? Jake nodded, finally turning to look at me. My heart broke for him. Dad, can I tell you something? Of course, anything. He took a deep breath. A few weeks ago, when I was visiting Mom at the hospital, I heard something. Something I didn't understand at the time. My blood ran cold. What did you hear, Jake? Dr. Pearson was talking to another nurse. They were arguing about something called shipments and product. I didn't know what it meant, but it sounded wrong. I pulled Jake into a tight hug, my mind racing. This was it, the missing piece we needed. But at what cost? Jake, listen to me, I said, pulling back to look him in the eye. What you heard, it's very important. But I need you to promise me something. Don't tell anyone else about this, okay? Not your friends, not your teachers, no one. Can you do that for me? Jake nodded solemnly. Is Mom in trouble? I swallowed hard. I don't know, buddy, but I'm going to do everything I can to protect our family. I promise. As Jake drifted off to sleep, I made a call to Sarah. We had work to do. The next few days were a blur of activity. Sarah and I dove deep into the hospital's network, uncovering a web of corruption that went far beyond Dr. Pearson. Nurses, pharmacists, even the hospital CEO, Dr. Marcus Whitmore, were all implicated in the drug ring. But the real gut punch came when we uncovered Lorraine's role. She wasn't just a pawn in Pearson's game. She was an active participant. The surveillance equipment in her car had picked up several damning conversations. She claimed she'd been coerced, that she was afraid for her job and the safety of our children. But the cold, hard evidence told a different story. I sat in Sarah's living room, staring at the transcripts of Lorraine's conversations. My hands shook with a mixture of rage and disbelief. I can't believe it, I muttered. All this time, she was... Jesus Christ. Sarah placed a comforting hand on my shoulder. I'm so sorry, Evan. I know this isn't what you wanted to find. I shook my head, a bitter laugh escaping me. No, it's exactly what I needed to find. Now I can nail that cheating bitch to the wall. Sarah's grip on my shoulder tightened. Evan, I know you're angry. You have every right to be. But we need to think this through carefully. If we expose Lorraine, we expose the whole operation. That includes the danger to your children. I stood up, pacing the room like a caged animal. So what? I'm just supposed to let her get away with it? Let her walk away with my kids, my money, everything? No, Sarah said firmly. We're going to make this right. But we need to be smart about it. We need a plan. We need to move fast, she said, before anyone else gets hurt. I nodded, a cold resolve settling over me. Let's end this. We spent the next few hours planning, reaching out to contacts Sarah still had in the DEA. By the time dawn broke, we had a solid plan in place. I made one last call to Lorraine. My voice was ice cold as I spoke. We need to talk. Now. An hour later, Lorraine sat across from me at our kitchen table. Evan, what's this about? I slid a folder across the table. Take a look. As Lorraine flipped through the evidence we'd gathered, the transcripts, the financial records, everything. The color drained from her face. How did you? She stammered. Does it matter? I cut her off. What matters is that I know everything, Lorraine. The affair, the drugs, all of it. She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with sobs. Evan, please. You don't understand. They threatened the kids. I didn't have a choice. I slammed my fist on the table, making her jump. Don't you dare use our children as an excuse. You had a choice, Lorraine. You could have come to me. We could have faced this together. Instead, you chose to betray everything we built. Lorraine looked up at me, her eyes pleading. What are you going to do? I leaned back, fixing her with a hard stare. That depends on you. The DEA is moving in on the hospital tomorrow. They're going to take down the whole operation. You have two choices. You can cooperate, tell them everything you know, or you can go down with the rest of them. And if I cooperate? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Then you get immunity, I said. But you lose your nursing license. And you sure as hell lose any chance of custody of our kids. Lorraine's face crumpled. Evan, please. They're my children too. You can't take them away from me. I stood up, my voice like steel. You lost the right to call them your children the moment you put them in danger. This isn't a negotiation, Lorraine. It's an ultimatum. Cooperate, or lose everything. As I walked out of the kitchen, leaving Lorraine sobbing at the table, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. Tomorrow, this whole nightmare would be over. One way or another, I was going to protect my family. And God help anyone who tried to stand in my way. I stood in the shadows of the hospital parking lot, my heart pounding like a jackhammer. The DEA agents were in position, their unmarked vans scattered strategically around the perimeter. Sarah's voice crackled in my earpiece, cool and collected. Remember, Evan, we need concrete evidence. Don't let your emotions get the better of you. I grunted in response, my eyes fixed on the hospital's main entrance. Any minute now, Lorraine would walk through those doors, wired and ready to blow this whole operation wide open. Part of me still couldn't believe she'd agreed to cooperate. But then again, when faced with the choice between losing everything or saving her own skin, Lorraine had always been good at looking out for number one. The sliding doors hissed open, and there she was. My wife, the mother of my children, the woman who'd betrayed everything we'd built together. She looked small and scared, nothing like the confident nurse I'd fallen in love with all those years ago. Good. Let her be scared. Let her feel a fraction of the fear and uncertainty she'd inflicted on our family. She's in, I muttered into my mic, game on. I watched as Lorraine made her way across the parking lot, her steps faltering slightly as she approached the staff entrance. For a moment, I thought she might bolt. But then she squared her shoulders and disappeared inside. Now came the hard part. The waiting. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. I paced back and forth, my mind racing through all the ways this could go wrong. What if Dr. Pearson saw through her act? What if the wire malfunctioned? What if? Evan. Sarah's voice cut through my spiraling thoughts. Deep breaths. She's got this. I nodded, forcing myself to take a long, steadying breath. Sarah was right. We'd prepared for this. Lorraine knew what was at stake. All we could do now was trust in the plan and hope like hell it worked. Suddenly, Sarah's voice crackled with urgency. We've got movement. Dr. Pearson just entered the boardroom. Lorraine's engaging him now. I clenched my fists, straining to hear any snippet of conversation through the earpiece. Lorraine's voice came through, slightly muffled but clear enough. Greg, I was wondering if we could talk about the upcoming shipment. I'm a little concerned about the quantities. There was a pause, and then Dr. Pearson's voice, smooth and confident. Lorraine, darling, you know we don't discuss business outside of our scheduled meetings. Why this sudden interest? I could hear the tension in Lorraine's voice as she scrambled for a response. I want to make sure we're being careful. After what happened with that nurse in radiology. Enough. Dr. Pearson's tone had turned sharp. We'll discuss this later. In private. Sarah's voice came through, urgent and low. He's suspicious. Lorraine needs to back off before he... But it was too late. I heard a scuffle, a muffled cry from Lorraine. Who are you working for? Dr. Pearson growled. Who put you up to this? My blood ran cold. This was it. The whole operation was about to go up in smoke, and Lorraine was in danger. I started towards the hospital entrance, ready to blow my cover and charge in there myself. Evan, no? Sarah's voice cut through the fog of panic. We need a distraction. Something to draw attention away from that room. My mind raced. A distraction. Something big enough to pull focus, but not so catastrophic as to endanger lives. And then it hit me. I sprinted across the parking lot to where I'd parked my tow truck. In seconds, I had it fired up and was barreling towards the emergency room entrance. With a sickening crunch of metal on metal, I plowed into a row of parked cars. The effect was instantaneous. Alarms blared. People came running out of the hospital. Through my earpiece, I heard the commotion echoing from inside. What the hell was that? Dr. Pearson's voice, distracted and alarmed. I should go check on my patients, Lorraine said quickly. There was a tense moment of silence, and then the sound of a door opening and closing. She was out. I stumbled out of the truck, playing the part of a dazed driver. As security guards rushed towards me, I caught a glimpse of Lorraine slipping out a side entrance, her face pale but determined. She's clear. I muttered into my mic, do it now. The next few minutes were chaos. DEA agents swarmed the hospital, their shouts echoing through the halls. I watched from the sidelines as Dr. Pearson was led out in handcuffs, his face a mask of rage and disbelief. Behind him came Dr. Whitmore, the hospital CEO, and a parade of other staff members I recognized from Lorraine's descriptions of the operation. And then it was over. The parking lot was a sea of flashing lights and confused onlookers. Reporters were already starting to arrive, drawn by the commotion like sharks to blood in the water. I found Lorraine sitting in the back of an ambulance, a blanket draped over her shoulders. She looked up as I approached. "It's done," I said, my voice flat. "You're in the clear." She nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek. "Evan, I held up a hand, cutting her off. "Save it. You did what you had to do. For the kids. But don't think for a second this changes anything between us." Lorraine flinched as if I'd slapped her, but I was beyond caring. I turned away, my eyes scanning the crowd until I found Sarah. She gave me a small nod, a silent acknowledgement of a job well done. As I walked away from the chaos, leaving Lorraine and the wreckage of our marriage behind, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. It wasn't over, not by a long shot. But for the first time in months, I could see a way forward. A way to protect my kids, to rebuild what Lorraine had so carelessly destroyed. And God help anyone who tried to stand in my way. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. The arrests at the hospital made headlines across Dayton, hell, across the whole state. My name was splashed across the front pages, hailed as the mechanic-turned-hero who'd helped bring down a major drug ring. It should have felt like a victory. Instead, it left a bitter taste in my mouth. Jake and Lily were struggling, caught in the crossfire of a war they never asked to be part of. Jake had become sullen and withdrawn, lashing out at the slightest provocation. Lily, too young to fully understand what was happening, clung to me like a lifeline, as if afraid I might disappear too. I found Jake in his room one afternoon, angrily pounding away at his video game controller. The sounds of virtual explosions filled the air, a fitting backdrop to the turmoil in our lives. "Hey, buddy," I said, leaning against the doorframe. "Can we talk?" Jake shrugged, not taking his eyes off the screen. "Whatever." I sighed, crossing the room to sit on the edge of his bed. "I know things have been tough lately, with your mom gone and all the stuff in the news." "Is it true?" Jake interrupted, finally pausing his game to look at me. "What they're saying about mom? That she was involved in drugs?" The question hit me like a sucker punch. I'd been dreading this moment, torn between protecting Jake from the ugly truth and my determination never to lie to my kids the way Lorraine had lied to all of us. "Yeah, buddy," I said softly. "It's true. Your mom. She made some really bad choices. Got mixed up with some dangerous people." Jake's face crumpled, and for a moment, I saw the little boy beneath the angry teenager. "But why? Didn't she care about us?" I pulled him into a hug, feeling his body shake with silent sobs. "Of course she cared about you, Jake. She lost her way. Made mistakes that she can't take back." As I held my son, I felt a fresh wave of anger towards Lorraine. How dare she put our children through this? How could she have been so selfish, so reckless with the lives of the people who depended on her? "Listen to me," I said, pulling back to look Jake in the eye. "What your mom did, that's on her. It's not your fault, and it's not Lily's fault. You hear me? The only thing you need to worry about is being a kid. I've got the rest covered." Jake nodded, wiping his nose on his sleeve. "Are you gonna forgive her? Let her come home?" The question caught me off guard. I'd been so focused on protecting the kids, on bringing down the drug ring, that I hadn't given much thought to what came next. But looking at Jake's hopeful face, I knew I had to be honest. "No, buddy," I said gently. "What your mom did, it's not something I can forgive. But that doesn't mean she stops being your mom. If you want to see her, talk to her, that's okay. I won't stand in the way of that." Jake was quiet for a long moment, processing. Then he looked up at me, his jaw set in a way that reminded me painfully of Lorraine. "I don't want to see her. Not now, maybe not ever." I nodded, a mixture of pride and sadness welling up in my chest. "That's your choice, Jake, and I'll support you, no matter what." As I left Jake's room, I found Sarah waiting in the hallway. She'd been a rock through all of this, helping with the kids, offering a shoulder to lean on when the weight of everything threatened to crush me. "How'd it go?" she asked softly, suddenly feeling every one of my 38 years. "About as well as can be expected. He's hurting, Sarah. They both are. And I don't know how to fix it." Sarah placed a comforting hand on my arm. "You can't fix it, Evan. Not all at once. But you're doing the right thing. Being honest with them, being there for them. That's what they need right now." I nodded, grateful for her steady presence. "I just hope it's enough." The next day, I found myself sitting across from Victoria Reeves, my divorce lawyer. The evidence we'd gathered during the sting operation had changed everything. Lorraine's involvement in the drug ring, coupled with the danger she'd put our children in, had given us the ammunition we needed to secure full custody. "It's as close to a slam dunk as you can get in family court," Victoria said, shuffling through the papers on her desk. "Lorraine's lawyer has already indicated they won't contest the custody arrangement. They know they don't have a leg to stand on." I leaned back in my chair, a satisfaction settling over me. Good. After everything she's put us through, the least she can do is make this easy. Victoria nodded, her expression softening slightly. "I know this isn't how you imagined things would turn out, Evan, but for what it's worth, I think you're doing the right thing. Your kids are lucky to have you." I stood up, shaking her hand. "Thanks, Victoria, for everything." As I left her office, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Relief that the legal battle was almost over. Anger at Lorraine for putting us in this position in the first place. And a deep, aching sadness for what might have been. But I pushed those feelings aside. I had 2 kids at home who needed me to be strong. Who needed me to be the parent Lorraine had failed to be. I was halfway to my truck when my phone rang. It was Sarah. "Evan, you need to get to the courthouse. Now." Her tone sent a chill down my spine. "What's going on?" "It's Christina Pearson," Sarah said, her voice tight. "She's been arrested, and you're not going to believe what they're saying about her." I swore under my breath, already turning towards the courthouse. "I'm on my way." As I navigated the midday traffic, my mind raced. Christina Pearson, Dr. Pearson's wife. The woman who'd seemed so shocked, so devastated by her husband's betrayal. What the hell was going on? I found Sarah outside the courthouse, her face grim. "It's worse than we thought, Evan. Christina wasn't just an innocent bystander in all this. She was the mastermind." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. "What?" Sarah nodded, her eyes hard. "She used her position as a pharmaceutical rep to orchestrate the whole operation. Greg Pearson, Lorraine, all of them. They were just pawns in her game." I leaned against the courthouse wall, my head spinning. Jesus Christ, how did we miss this? "She played us," Sarah said, her voice tight with anger. "Played us all. But she slipped up. Got greedy. The DEA's been building a case against her for months." I thought back to that day in the coffee shop, Christina's perfectly manicured nails wrapped around her cup, her eyes wide with feigned innocence as I told her about her husband's affair. How could I have been so blind? "What happens now?" I asked. Sarah's expression was grim. "Greg Pearson's talking, trying to cut a deal. Between his testimony and the evidence they've gathered, Christina's going away for a long time." I nodded, a cold resolve settling over me. Good. Let her rot. As we walked into the courthouse, ready to face whatever new revelations awaited us, I couldn't help but think of Lorraine. Had she known about Christina's role in all this? Had she been protecting her all along? One thing was certain, this was far from over. And I'd be damned if I let anyone else hurt my family again. The courtroom was packed, a sea of reporters and curious onlookers craning their necks to catch a glimpse of Christina Pearson. She sat at the defendant's table, her perfectly styled hair and designer suit a stark contrast to the handcuffs around her wrists. I slid into a seat next to Sarah, my eyes fixed on the back of Christina's head. How many lives had she ruined? How many families had she torn apart with her greed? The judge entered, and the room fell silent. As the charges were read: racketeering, drug trafficking, money laundering, I felt a satisfaction. This woman had nearly destroyed everything I held dear. Now she was going to pay. Christina's lawyer droned on about mitigating circumstances, about how she'd been under tremendous pressure from her pharmaceutical company. I tuned him out, my mind drifting to Jake and Lily. How was I going to explain this latest twist to them? Suddenly, there was a commotion at the back of the courtroom. I turned to see Greg Pearson being led in, flanked by guards. His eyes locked with Christina's for a moment, and I saw a flicker of something pass between them. Betrayal? Regret? Or just the realization that their carefully constructed world of lies was crumbling around them? As Greg took the stand, his testimony damning Christina with every word, I felt a tap on my shoulder. It was Sarah, her expression urgent. "We need to go," she whispered. "Now." I followed her out of the courtroom, confused. "What's going on?" Sarah's face was stern. "I just got a call from my contact at the DEA. Lorraine's missing." My blood ran cold. "What do you mean, missing?" "She never showed up for her scheduled check-in. They went to her apartment, and it was cleaned out. She's in the wind, Evan." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Lorraine, gone. After everything we'd been through, everything she put us through, she'd run. The kids, I managed to choke out. "We need to get to the kids." Sarah nodded, already pulling out her keys. "I'll drive." As we raced across town, my mind was a whirlwind of worst-case scenarios. Had Lorraine taken the kids? Was she planning to run with them? Or was this some desperate attempt to escape the consequences of her actions? We screeched to a halt outside my house, and I was out of the car before Sarah had even fully stopped. I burst through the front door, my heart in my throat. "Jake! Lily!" I shouted, panic rising in my chest. And then I heard it, the sound of Lily's laughter drifting from the backyard. I rushed through the house, Sarah hot on my heels, and flung open the back door. There, in the fading afternoon light, were Jake and Lily, playing on the swing set as if nothing in the world was wrong. My knees nearly buckled with relief. Jake looked up as we came out, his brow furrowing at the panic on our faces. "Dad? What's wrong?" I crossed the yard in 3 long strides, pulling both kids into a fierce hug. They squirmed in confusion, but I held on tight, my heart still racing. "Dad, you're squishing us," Jake protested, his voice muffled against my chest. I loosened my grip, forcing a smile. "Sorry, guys. I missed you." Sarah approached, her face carefully neutral. "Hey, kiddos, how about we go inside and make some hot chocolate?" As Sarah herded the kids into the house, I took a moment to collect myself. Lorraine was gone. Part of me wanted to be furious, to curse her name for running out on us again. But a smaller, more rational part was relieved. At least she hadn't tried to take the kids. Inside, I found Sarah in the kitchen, stirring hot chocolate on the stove while Jake and Lily sat at the counter, eyeing us suspiciously. "All right, Dad," Jake said, his voice carrying an edge that reminded me painfully of myself. "What's really going on?" I exchanged a look with Sarah, then sighed. No more lies. No more half-truths. They deserved better than that. "Your mom's gone," I said, watching their faces carefully. She left town without telling anyone." Lily's lower lip trembled. "Is she coming back?" I knelt down next to her chair, taking her small hand in mine. "I don't know, sweetheart. But what I do know is that we're going to be okay. The 3 of us, we're a team. Right?" Jake's face had hardened, his jaw set in a way that made him look older than his years. "Good riddance," he muttered. "Jake," I started, but he cut me off. "No, Dad. She left us. Again. She doesn't get to just walk in and out of our lives whenever she feels like it." I nodded, a mix of pride and sadness welling up in my chest. "You're right, buddy. What your mom did, it's not okay. But remember what we talked about? It's okay to be angry. It's okay to be hurt. Just don't let those feelings eat you up inside." As I looked at my children, Jake, trying so hard to be strong, and Lily, her eyes wide with confusion and fear, I felt a resolve settle over me. Lorraine might have given up on this family, but I never would. The next few months were a blur of activity. With Lorraine gone and the dust settling from the hospital scandal, I threw myself into rebuilding our lives. I started a support group for families impacted by addiction and infidelity. Every Tuesday night, I'd find myself in the community center, surrounded by people whose stories were painfully similar to my own. It wasn't much, but if I could help even one family avoid the hell we'd been through, it would be worth it. Jake and Lily were in therapy, slowly working through the trauma of the past year. It wasn't easy. There were nights when Lily's nightmares had her crawling into my bed, and days when Jake's anger exploded in shouting matches that left us both drained. But we were making progress, one day at a time. And then there was Sarah. She'd been my rock through all of this, a steady presence when everything else was falling apart. As the weeks turned into months, I found myself looking at her differently. The way her eyes crinkled when she laughed, the fierce intelligence behind her gaze. It scared the hell out of me, but I couldn't deny the warmth that spread through my chest whenever she was around. One night, after the kids were in bed, Sarah and I sat on the back porch, nursing beers and watching the fireflies dance in the yard. "Penny for your thoughts," she said, nudging my shoulder gently. I chuckled, shaking my head. "Not sure they're worth that much." Sarah fixed me with a look that said she wasn't buying it. "Come on, Callahan. Spill." I took a long pull from my beer, gathering my courage. "I was just thinking about us, about how much you've done for me, for the kids. I don't know if I ever properly thanked you for that." Sarah's expression softened. "You don't have to thank me, Evan. That's what friends do." "Friends," I repeated, the word feeling inadequate. "Sarah, I think I might be feeling something more than friendship." The words hung in the air between us, heavy with possibility. Sarah set her beer down, turning to face me fully. "Evan," she said softly, "are you sure? After everything with Lorraine?" I reached out, taking her hand in mine. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life. I know it's complicated, with the kids and everything we've been through. But Sarah, you make me feel alive again. You make me want to be better, to do better." Sarah's eyes glistened in the soft porch light. Slowly, giving me every chance to pull away, she leaned in. Our lips met, and it was like coming home. Soft and warm and right in a way I'd almost forgotten was possible. When we parted, Sarah rested her forehead against mine. "We'll take it slow," she murmured. "For the kids." I nodded, a weight I hadn't even realized I'd been carrying lifting from my shoulders. "For the kids," I agreed. As the summer faded into fall, life settled into a new rhythm. Jake and Lily were doing better in therapy, their smiles coming more easily, their nightmares less frequent. The support group was growing, attracting attention from local media and even a few politicians interested in addressing the opioid crisis. And Sarah was a constant, steady presence. We took things slow, careful not to rush into anything that might upset the delicate balance we'd achieved. But with each passing day, I felt more certain that us, our little patchwork family, was exactly where I was meant to be. It wasn't perfect. There were still days when the weight of everything that had happened threatened to crush me. Days when I'd catch Jake staring at old family photos, his expression unreadable. Days when Lily would ask, in her small voice, if Mommy was ever coming home. But we faced those days together. As a family. The story should have ended there. A neat little bow on a messy situation. But life, I was learning, rarely wrapped things up so tidily. It was a crisp October morning when the letter arrived. No return address, just my name scrawled in familiar handwriting. Lorraine's handwriting. I stared at the envelope for a long time, debating whether to open it or just toss it in the trash. In the end, curiosity won out. Inside was a single sheet of paper, covered in Lorraine's neat script. "Evan, I know I have no right to contact you after everything I've done, but I needed you to know that I'm sorry. Sorrier than I've ever been for anything in my life. What I did to you, to our children, is unforgivable. I know that now. I'm getting help. Real help, not just the court-mandated stuff. I'm trying to understand why I did what I did. Why I threw away everything good in my life for a lie. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect anything. But I want you to know that I think of Jake and Lily every day. That I love them, even if I've lost the right to be their mother. Take care of them, Evan. Be the parent I couldn't be. Lorraine." I read the letter twice, then a third time. Emotions warring in my chest. Part of me wanted to crumple it up, to pretend I'd never seen it. But another part, A part one thought had died the day I confronted Lorraine about her affair. Felt a twinge of something. Not forgiveness, exactly, but maybe understanding. I folded the letter carefully, tucking it into my wallet. Maybe someday, when Jake and Lily were older, they'd want to read it. Maybe not, but it would be there. A reminder of where we'd been and how far we'd come. That evening, as I watched Jake help Lily with her homework, Sarah's arm wrapped comfortably around my waist, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. We'd been through hell, all of us, but we'd come out the other side stronger, more resilient. This wasn't the life I'd imagined for myself all those years ago when Lorraine and I said, I do. It was messy, more complicated. But as I looked at the faces of the people I loved most in the world, I realized something. It was better. The sound of the doorbell jolted me out of my reverie. I opened the front door to find a man in a suit, holding an envelope. Evan Callahan, he asked. I nodded, a sense of unease creeping over me. You've been served, he said, handing me the envelope. Have a nice day. As I closed the door, my hands shaking slightly, I tore open the envelope. Legal papers spilled out, covered in dense text. But 3 words jumped out at me, making my blood run cold. Petition for custody. Lorraine was back, and she was fighting for the kids. Her apology didn't mean anything after all. The battle wasn't over. Not by a long shot. But as I turned to face my family, Sarah, Jake, Lily, all looking at me with concern, I knew one thing for certain. I was ready for whatever came next. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your precious time. If you enjoyed this story, then please make sure you subscribe to this channel. That would help me a lot. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.